Okay. Um, okay, we're gonna get started here. I'm gonna be talking about The Last of Us today. This is for my journalism 1501 final project. And in this, we're gonna be having kind of an analysis, understanding, and celebration of this game. So to first look at this game, we have to look at the development. And we'll do that by looking first at the releases. So some important background is in looking at this game, we're going to look at the two parts as a whole. They're separate releases. Part one and part two are full length games on their own, but they kind of come together to create a full story. So we're going to look at that in that way. And they have a lot of commonalities, which will make that easy to do. Um, so in 2013, The Last of Us Part 1 was released just under the name The Last of Us. And then a year later, kind of pending its really big success, we saw The Last of Us Remastered, which was just a graphical kind of fine tuning. It had a lot of quality of life improvements to the overall gameplay and story stuff. Um, and then 6 years later, kind of following the success of those, in June, we got The Last of Us Part 2, which continued that story that we were left on a cliffhanger of in the first games. And then this year in September, we received a full overhaul, proper overhaul of The Last of Us Part 1, which is a ground up re-envisioning of the game with a lot of the same kind of overall structure, but a full mechanical rebuild. And then we'll look at Naughty Dog here. So Naughty Dog is the studio, the developers that brought us The Last of Us. Um, they're based in Santa Monica, and according to Zippia.com, they have about 500 employees currently, with a distribution of about 75% male and 25% female, which is a growth kind of from previous years. So it's a really great sign that we're seeing a larger proliferation of women in the gaming industry. Always welcome, especially in our changing times. So some pretty popular releases, four kind of big series that Naughty Dog has made. The Crash Bandicoot series, including some of these games, as well as the PlayStation 1 classics. On this graphic here, we've got the Last of Us games on the left, Uncharted in the middle, and then Jak and Daxter. So those four are kind of the big four that Naughty Dog are known for. Um, so let's get into talking about how these two games were received. So the first game is really quoted as one of the greatest games of all time. If you know video games, there's a chance pretty good chance you know The Last of Us. It's really kind of universally praised, and there's a lot of people who have got a lot of great things to say about this game. And then the same with part two, it received a lot of praise, especially from critics. Um, but I don't think this is a fair way to look at these reviews. Because if you're going to look up an average score for this game, you're going to get something about a 55 out of 100. And the reason for that is that this game is super polarizing in the reviews. So we're going to see here that this game is really split between people who gave this game a perfect score and then people who gave it just an awful score. And that has a lot to do with some of the story beats, and I can't really get into that in this project. But it's important to know that these games together are not universally acclaimed, especially part two, which received a lot of backlash from players and certain audience groups. So we'll continue forward looking at narrative and design, super huge aspects of this game. So in terms of narrative, I'm not going to describe the plot of this game. As much as I would like to kind of get into the fine points, I think it's more a game that you should experience on your own, and you should come up with your own conclusions to the themes and those sorts of things. But the themes that I extracted from it in my playthroughs of these two games, some of the themes include love, grief, identity, and then it kind of poses a central question of what does it mean to be alive? So moving forward, we're going to look at gameplay here. So the gameplay in The Last of Us is broken up into two sort of big families. The first is combat. So looking at combat, there's a lot of really gritty firearm combat using the weapons. Melee combat as well, especially in part two, is a huge part of the identity is getting up close and personal with your enemies. And then stealth combat. So these different types of approaches you can take to combat really give players freedom to express themselves through the way that they approach these combat scenarios. And another super important aspect is these non-combat sections where we're going to be doing things like exploring, and also these non-combat just kind of walk and talk sections where you're going to be developing these characters and getting to know the characters that you're walking around and exploring the world with. And all of these sort of come together to break that tradition of playing recklessly that Jan Simons talks about in her article. These games create characters that you care about and that you want to see succeed. And that causes you to play as if you were them and be more careful about how you're playing the game. So moving forward, we're going to talk a little bit about the design of these games, which does a lot of really innovative stuff. So one of the ways that this game is super innovative is its approach to a linear game design. So the Last of Us games incorporate this sort of arena bottleneck design where you have these open, larger spaces that you're able to explore or fight through. It could be combat areas. And then you have these kind of bottlenecked areas where you come through these areas that you're forced through, and those progress kind of you to the next arena. And we'll talk about how these work in more detail. So the combat arenas and just the arenas in general are these larger open areas. You can see in here that they're pretty large in size, and they're open, and they have some room for freedom of moving around and how you might approach. And then these bottlenecks, this is actually from a different game, but it's a principle that's applied in a lot of games nowadays where you funnel the player towards an objective by forcing them through sort of a gap, or it might be some other set piece. And through this, you're able to both simultaneously force the player down the pathway that you want them to. And as you can see in this photo, the stuff that you can see is loading in, that those textures are loading in for the future level design stuff. And then behind where the player can see, that stuff is unloaded so that you don't have these loading screens of where things are coming into texture in and out. So Push Square kind of talks about this in a little more detail. This is where I got some of this information in this really awesome image from God of War. Moving ahead, we're going to talk a little bit about the art style. A huge kind of pillar of these games is the art style. So in part one, a lot of the art style contributes to this theme of the journey and the joy of love and working together. And then part two is a little more intimate story about how a place can be negatively affected in a really troubling way by a large scale event like this. Cook and Becker interviewed the art director for part two, which is some of the images shown here. And he talked about how when developing the art style for these games, developers use kind of conceptualization of real events and how decomposition of human architecture might actually occur. So these are really realistic depictions as far as we know of what might happen in this actual scenario, which is super awesome. Another great thing that art does for this game is it establishes our themes. So you can see in this photo here, Ellie's framed in this tender, very small, and then this really large gray, kind of open, gritty environment, which contributes to that theme of loneliness, one against an army, and in a really hospitable foreign place. And then here's some character designs, and a lot of these are really just analogous to what you might think of how somebody would dress and prepare themselves in a post-apocalyptic scenario. And all of these work together to establish that magic circle and to hold you into a place where this seems believable and that you don't have to be far-fetched in thinking about these ideas. So another pillar that we're going to look at is representation, a huge part of these games, and one that Naughty Dog is touted for in a lot of articles and in media. So first we'll talk a little bit about race and ethnicity. So looking at this photo here, you're going to see these three kind of white protagonists here. But a really great thing about how these games work is it doesn't portray just Boilermaker generic characters. Like Joel on the left is not just some badass action hero. He is a real person who's made really morally gray decisions. Ellie in the middle, another person who's made morally gray decisions, also a LGBTQ plus character. And then Abby on the right is a character, again, morally gray decisions, but also someone who portrays the idea of sort of a non-traditional body physique, which kind of presents the gaming industry with a portrayal of non-traditional body types, which is super awesome to incorporate. Additionally, we get to see race and ethnicity expressed through some characters in these games, for example, Jesse here, but tons of other characters. It's not just a big cast of traditional straight white male protagonists. It's a really diverse group, as well as the NPCs and the enemies in these games and friendly NPCs. You're not just going to be fighting or interacting with traditionally uniform groups. There's variation, it's welcome. And another thing that's really touched on in these games is identity. And for example, we've got sexuality, the gender identity, religion, and politics. And I wish I could get into more detail about all four of these. I don't have the time to do so, but these are expressed and they're done so for what feels and seems to be like the first time in the industry. So it's an awesome way to look at these ideas through something that we might consume in a different way other than books and movies and TV shows and other media. So as I kind of approach the end here, I want to talk just quickly about the future and legacy of these games. Something to look forward to here coming up in just about a month, I guess, coming past the due date of this assignment, is the Last of Us series on HBO Max. Some of the cast members on the right here we can see a really awesome cast of characters shaking up the traditional idea of the game and providing a new demographic of players, those who might not be gamers, to experience the story of that first part. That's something really awesome, and I'm really excited to see how this series plays out. Another awesome stepping stone to look forward to is this Last of Us Factions standalone game, which should be also coming out in 2023, which is a multiplayer experience which appears to be set in San Francisco. I'm not a huge multiplayer game fan, but I'm looking forward to this because Naughty Dog has not let me down so far. And then the big kind of question mark for us, Last of Us fans, is part 3 going to happen? We've seen obviously so much from these first two parts. It seems like it would make sense to see that third part coming soon and to finish that sort of trilogy story that could be told through these 3 games. But it remains to be seen if the ending of part 2, if the developers found that to be a fitting ending to the characters of these games, or if they're going to continue and finish this story as a trilogy. So in conclusion, I think that The Last of Us Parts 1 and 2 are 2 of the greatest games ever made. I think that they're staples within the gaming genre or within the gaming sphere, and they provide really unique experiences and do all of the things that we want and need in our gaming industry so well. And they provide us with these great, powerful stories that are applicable and realistic in modern day. So I think that these games should be praised, and we should all be thankful that we got to experience them, and that for those out there who have not, that we have that chance to do so in the future. Here are the sources that I used. Red are from external, green are from course materials. And thank you for being here and watching this recording. Thanks. Have an awesome day.